Greetings. Welcome to Powered by Nyame. I'm your guide and host, Gracie Kunadu. On this episode, our focus will be expectations. Yes, the tyranny of expectations. Now, I want to start with a story featuring yours truly. And this story may, for many of you, resonate. The story begins somewhere when I was about 7 or 8 years old. As some of you know, I was born in the island of Jamaica. And on that island, one evening, I came back from the store and I was carrying some items my mom told me to buy. And when I got to the gate where we lived, I saw fire. And then I saw smoke, and I smelled the smoke, and I saw the fire. And this fire was raging, and the fire was raging in our house. Now, you should know that when I say house, I mean a compound. Most of the compounds in Ghana, West Africa, and other parts of the African world, whereby there are several large rooms that are adjoined, that are connected together, and multiple people. So my grandfather, his wife, my mother, us the children, and I think an aunt and somebody else lived on this compound. We call it the yard. And so in this yard space, as I entered, the gate area, I remember feeling the fire now and inhaling the smoke. And immediately I saw my younger brother, his white t-shirt was filled with little embers of fire. In fact, it was getting larger, more than an ember. And so I grabbed him and I threw him on the dirt ground, and I rolled him on the dirt ground, almost instinctually. And once he was cool, I saw a little bit of that fire on me. So I cleansed myself very quickly of the sparks and the flames that were on me. And then immediately I ran to our door where I knew my mother and my younger sister stayed. By the time I got there, the entire door, imagine a, an 80-inch tall by 30-inch wide door that is just engulfed with flames. It was so hot, hotter than an oven. When you open an oven door and it's at 500 degrees Fahrenheit, that's just a glimpse or a modicum of the feeling. But I still try to pierce my eyes inside just to see where mom was, see where my sister was. Now, I'll spare you the details in terms of what happened to my mother and my sister, because the story's not really about them. The story's really about me. But what happened in that moment changed my life in many ways. And so I remember I sat on a tree stump that had already been cut for many years. I just sat there. Night melted into day. By the morning time, which is about 6:30, 7 o'clock, the sun is already up. I remember that there was a fire truck that came hours after the fire. Everything else was almost like a blank. I don't remember anything else because that entire night, I stood up sitting on that bark of that tree stump and I just steered. I steered the entire night. The entire night, I just steered and steered and steered into what could I have done more to prevent or to help my mother and sister, whom at that point I didn't know what happened to them because the fire was too much for me to enter the room. And by the time I tried to enter the room, it was already too late. And so as I stared into something, right? It wasn't the night, it was something I stared into. My past, my future, whatever it was at 8 years old, I made certain conscious decisions. First, I decided that I'm going to focus on solutions. And people that know me, they know me that that's what I do. I take care of business because I focus on solutions. I don't focus on problems. I don't focus on crises. I don't focus on issues and challenges. I focus on solutions, right? And that moment where it came from as a 7, 8-year-old because of that fire and what it did to my family in that moment and, of course, moments thereafter. Then I told myself that I'm not going to feel pain, right? Emotions are secondary or third place in my eyes at that point, because at that point, I needed something to numb me from feeling the pain of hurt, of loss, of disappointment, of why did this happen to my people who didn't do anything to deserve it. And third, I made a conscious choice about the kind of person, the kind of man that I would be, right? Yes, I did. Now, some might think those kinds of proclamations to myself, I brought on those own expectations. And in part, I did. But we, human beings, are made by our circumstances that we're born into. And we also make the circumstances, because that fire was not by nature, it was human made. And I know of the person who started the fire and the reasons for that person starting the fire years later, of course. But I expected of me to be a problem solver, to prevent, to be there, to put myself, my pain, my hurt, my disappointment, my loss to the side. And that made me into a kind of person that made his way through, right? All the way through from undergraduate, I see from really from grade school on up. I basically raised myself. Yes, I lived with an aunt that was a terrorist. And I left her house, when I could at age, I think 18 or 19 on my own. So I basically raised myself because my mother was not around and my father was in a different country. Once we were in the United States, he remained in Jamaica. But I began to build myself up into these expectations that I thought and I believed that others would expect of me, both as a young child, as a firstborn child who burdens the responsibility for 6 other siblings, as a father, as a husband, as an older brother, as a uncle to my siblings who have children, and much more, right? I began to shoulder all this and putting everyone else first. You know why? Because of expectations. People expected me to not feel, to not have a say in how I felt, not have a say in my own pain, in my own loss, my own anxiety, my own disappointment, right? Because of expectations. And we all go through a version of this story. It doesn't have to be a fire. It doesn't have to be something cataclysmic. It can be much simpler or much more damning. Either way, we are held to expectations, whether we craft them or we think we craft them, or our circumstances and or the people around us build a scaffold called expectations around us. And essentially we try to live almost like a puppet master with strings in our backs to feed and to meet those expectations. Husbands' expectations, wives' expectations, children expectations, grandparent expectations, uncles, aunts, nieces, nephews expectations, right? As a scholar expectations, as a professor expectation, as a publisher expectation, as whatever your trade or craft may be or guild may be, you have expectations surrounding you, engulfing you, enveloping you. And some of us can't take it. Some of us crack. Some of us don't make it out of that vortex, out of that enveloping force field of expectations. Because the more we try to live up to them, the more we're not living ourselves, the more we're not being ourselves, right? And it took me a while to really flush that out. And so I will get to, before we close this episode, what I've done for my own sanity, for my own peace of mind, right? To address expectations, right? But what I want to lay out to you in even more clearer detail is that there's nothing inherently wrong with expectations. There isn't, right? Because we should expect things and expect something of those around us that we care and love and have some form of relationship with, right? We should have expectations. In other words, when I go to the mechanic shop, I expect that mechanic to fix my car and fix the problem and fix it well. When I go on an airline, I expect the pilots to be competent and to keep that metal bird in the air and land us safely. When I go to a restaurant, I expect the chef or the cooks to prepare my meal and do it well in a way that is both nutritious and delicious. So we need expectations. There's no way we cannot have expectations. It is like blood in the veins of humans. Expectations are blood in the veins of humanity. We have to have them. They give us something of a compass to not only measure those about us and those we encounter, but it also gives us something to look forward to, right? So on our birthdays, we expect something, right? At least most of us, right? We expect. When we meet someone, we have expectations, right? When we are fans of someone, we have expectations, right? And so expectations in and of themselves is not an issue, a problem. What becomes the tyranny, what becomes the problem is living our lives through expectations that are the front seat drivers, while we, our true selves, are in the back seat. That's when the problem becomes. And that's what I realized from that moment. And the fact that I could pinpoint the exact moment, the event, and the circumstances that it happened took years of work. So I will not pretend to you that this is something that just happens overnight or it happens immediately. Oh, I just woke up one day and just felt this way. It's based upon years of just introspection and digging and probing and asking questions. Of course, meeting great people, having great people around me, that would poke at certain things that, just hit me in a certain way. And I had to look at myself and say, wait a second, why do I feel this way? Why do I respond this way? Right? Is there something that in childhood that, I have not reconciled with, I've not come to terms or peace with, right? As an adult. And I want to share this with you. On the other side, meaning on the spiritual side, that is, when we go back home to the village, the proverbial village, right? When we leave this human body and form and go back as purely spirit, for those of us that do go home, because some of us don't go home, right? And you can see in other videos, about what it means to be a arrested or condemned spirit. For those of us that go back home as pure spirit, as energy, right, as force, and take on a different form than the ones that we're accustomed to right now, at home right now as I speak, there is a younger version of me there. There's an older version of me there, right? Sort of archived, already there, right? Because they've already experienced something, right? The older one is what I'm going to grow into as I get older. The younger one is I've already archived. I've already had those sort of experiences, right? And he's already home, right? And what I've come to realize, moreover, is that there's a childhood version of me, not home. And here is the point I want to get to. So I had to come to peace with that pain, that hurt, that loss from that fire, where I made those proclamations to myself, made those crucial life-changing decisions at 8 years old, right? The kind of person that I was going to grow into, that I was going to be, and the reasons for doing so. I had to first find the 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old me, right? And once I found him, because he's trapped inside, my soul, my heart, right? He's there. And I've held him hostage for all these years, all these decades, held him hostage, right? I didn't release him to go back home. And if he doesn't go back home, then that part of the puzzle that completes me here as a human being will be incomplete, right? Will never be resolved. And so once I found him, and I've seen him before, I've seen him in my dreams, I've seen him, around here or there. But I sat him down and I spoke to him like I'm speaking to you, right? And I told him, I acknowledged the hurt, the pain, the loss, the anxiety, the pressure I put on myself, because now expectations were placed upon me as the oldest child, as the most responsible child, the child that would take care of others and put himself before others, including his own feelings, right? And once I acknowledged that with him, right, and, even cried with him, because I'm crying for him and I'm crying for me, right? And by crying, I don't mean boo-hooing. I mean literally releasing that pressure, releasing that imprisonment of my younger self that's trapped inside. And we all have these versions of us trapped inside. We do, right? And I'll get back to that in a moment. And so once I had my chat with him, I told him I loved him because I loved me, and I told him I loved him. I needed to do that. This wasn't a script anyway. This was purely what came from my heart and my soul. And this is the way it has to be. It has to be pure, it has to be honest, it has to be innocent, right? Like the day we were born. And once I did that, and I spoke to him, right? Told him I love you before I said goodbye, and that he goes home. Because once he's home back in the village, then those parts of the home are already complete, which means me on this side, I'm more resolved and complete, less burdened, less hindered. So when it's my time, hopefully decades later, to go to the village, when my number is called and my time is to go through the portal, and yes, there is a portal to go through to go back home, right? I won't be burdened, hung down by my decisions I've made, about expectations, that circumstances that other people over the years reinforced that I helped to craft, and deal with the source of it, which for me, in my case, and for many of us really, because remember that the quality of our childhood shapes and sometimes determines the quality and the quantity of our adulthood. In other words, what our childhood is, what our adult will become in many ways, right? And so many of our adult challenges, issues, and lack of breakthrough is because of what? Pain, anxiety, hurt, loss, and whatever the shape and form of those feelings and energies may be, are trapped in younger versions of us that we have not pulled out, that we have not acknowledged, that we have not dealt with, that we have not released, so they can go home, so you can be free, right? The more you hold them, meaning the earlier versions of you, hostage, the more you can't grow and be the person you came here to be, which means the more you'll be more burdened and weighed down. And even if you go to the pool, you won't be able to get through because you're too burdened, right? And especially when you get to the portal and you come before the bigger heads, right? The elders, as we call them, right? And they ask you what you have learned, and you're so distracted and so blinded by the burdens, you don't have a quality answer, right? Well, there are places for you. And so what I want to leave you with then is the implication of all this, right? Which is that expectations, wherever and whomever they come from, they have to be addressed and they have to be dealt with, because that burdening, that weight and pressure literally will hold us back, not just in human terms, but in the other world as well. For Powered by Nyame, I've been your guide and host. Please drop your questions, comments, experiences, whatever may be on your mind, on your heart, in the comment section below. Until next time, stay well.